Video on the creation of the welfare state, focusing around the NHS and the exam question you've been set this week. So just a quick revision loom lesson for you to be getting on with. So hopefully you've got pen and paper in front of you. You should be writing down the learning question, which is how did the welfare state happen? Okay, and your purple learning question, which is that push real challenge question for you, is what impact did the welfare state have on public health? Okay, so quickly, let's try and have a little think about the NHS. So what do you already know about the NHS? And obviously we know in our current sort of situation that we're going through at the moment with all the different health crises and what's going on with the pandemic, okay, the NHS is really at the centre of helping our country, okay? So it's obviously still very, very important, but what can you remember about its creation? Can you remember anything at all? What does it do? Really basic facts, okay? So I'm going to give you a minute. Just throw everything you know on a page. Don't mind if you spider diagram it or if you bullet point list it, but just get some ideas down. And remember, you can pause this video at any point when you need to, okay? And just click play when you're ready to go. So I'll stop for a second and then you can get going with it. Okay, so I know I didn't stop very long though, but as I said, please pause and play as you need. Okay, so just a few ideas that I have that you might have, and if you don't, please add them to your spider diagram. Okay, is we know the NHS stands for the National Health Service, okay? It's people's taxes that help pay for the NHS. It's one of the things that we contribute from our wages. It was formed in 1948 by Aneurin Bevan. Okay, and hopefully that date's like, ringing alarm bells to you. It's just after the end of the Second World War in 1945. That might be very significant to have a little, keep that in your mind as we move forward. Offered free healthcare, okay, so this means that doctors, hospitals, ambulance, dentists, opticians, all of these things are covered by the National Health Service, okay, so you have access as a person living in this country to all of these things, okay, when and if you need them. And finally, it can be accessed by all who need it, okay, so it's for everyone. It's irrelevant of your class, okay, or your position in society, anything like that. Everybody has access to the NHS. It's completely for the people, all right? So that's really important moving forward. You understand the importance and the role the NHS plays in society, okay? Right then, so let's have a think. How did we actually come about with the idea of the NHS? Well, and a really big part of that was the Second World War, okay? So we have to think that the attitudes of Norman people, okay, had changed a lot. We'd had a First World War, there was a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and then we had a Second World War, okay? And we know that millions died, okay? The, country was often damaged by lots of the bombings, okay? And it was a really tragic time. Now, people didn't want to see any more suffering. They feel like the sacrifices they had made for their country abroad, okay, should be then mean they're creating a better future for themselves at home, okay? They're fighting for a better world, all right? And this was the whole point that people, they wanted things to get better for them, because we know up to this point in history, okay, when we look at public health and we look at different medicines that were available, okay, we know that actually living conditions weren't very great. Yeah, we know that the government for a very long time had a laissez-faire attitude towards public health and how much they should be involved with helping people. Okay, but with this national crisis of the First and Second World War, people came together and they felt they were fighting, side by side, irrelevant of their class and position, okay, and they were fighting for a united, better world when the war was over, okay? And from that, we get the idea of the NHS, all right? And, a lot of middle class people, from the countryside that often hadn't been into the cities before, okay, when the war came about and the movement that the war meant for people to be going in and registering and, moving around, it meant they were really shocked at how dirty and undernourished, okay, the refugees coming in to who they were putting up and sheltering in the Blitz, okay, were. Okay, so it was a real shock. I couldn't quite believe it. Now, so a really key report moving forward is you have someone called Sir William Beveridge, okay? Now, he put out a report in 1842, so we're still going through the war at this point in time. Now, He believed there was something called the five giants, okay? And these could, ruin people's lives. Now, they were disease, want, okay? And that's things that you need. Ignorance, so thinking about ignorance, so things that people don't understand, they're not aware of, okay? And then also idleness. So that means sort of laziness, not having a job, things like that. And squalor, okay? So and squalor means poor living conditions. So, these are the five things that he believed that people, needed in the, to be able to get away from if they wanted to create a better world for themselves. So the report suggested that the ways to improve the quality of life for people, okay, was to take charge of social security. And it came up with this very famous quote, okay, from the cradle to the grave. So that idea that, it is the government's responsibility to be looking after you, okay, from the moment you're born. You often be born in a hospital with, within the NHS service, in a maternity ward, you've got midwives around you. That from that point onwards, throughout your life, you should be cared for and looked after by sort of your government and society around you. Okay, so that was really, really important. That saying, from the cradle to the grave. All right, it's something hopefully you can take forward. Now remember, if you need to pause this to take some notes, which I suggest you do, okay, don't worry about my speed. Just pause and play whenever you feel like doing so. All right. So, from Beveridge's report, okay, the government knew they needed to act. And after the Second World War, you have a conservative government that was led by Churchill, okay? Now, they weren't really acknowledging that much of the social changes that needed to be made. They were still very stuck in sort of the wartime government, okay? However, you have a new Labour government, okay, that comes in. This led by a man called Attlee, okay, and he says, look, we're willing to listen here, guys. We're willing to listen to Beveridge's report and help improve our society. All right. Now, they appoint someone, okay, who's a key figure in our learning today, called Aneurin Bevan, okay, and he's the Minister of Health. So it's his job, okay, to help improve the healthcare and the health service in the United Kingdom. All right. So what he says is that he wants to create, the welfare state, and from this, okay, and from Beveridge's reforms, he decides, number one, he sets off, okay, he sets up the health service in the National Health Service in 1948, which obviously provides a free healthcare service to everyone. This includes doctors, hospitals, dentists, ambulances, and opticians. People are given a childcare allowance, okay? So they have that allowance to make sure they can always get the very basics they need for their children, be it from baby milk or nappies or school dinner money, okay? As they get older, you get this allowance, okay? Benefits, which means obviously financial help for people who, are in very poor situations that are struggling to be able to have enough income to live. The school leaving age is raised to 15 years old, so children have to remain in education, okay, until the age of 15, really protecting them from having to go into, the world of work, which is often quite harsh and quite sort of labour for them. And there's a massive slum clearance in 1948, okay, which means they get rid of a lot of the slums, and 280,000 council homes start being built a year to try and help families, okay, make sure they've got access to a roof over their heads and a nice place to live for them to be able to enjoy their lives and be part of society, this new utopia that they're living in after the war. Okay, so this is what Bevan does for the welfare state. Now, to begin with, there is some opposition, okay? With all of these changes we look at in our medical course so far, okay, very few things come without people, doubting it or having opposition. And a lot of the doctors were not keen for the NHS service, okay? They felt that it would reduce their wages and they'd lose less control over their working hours, the patients they wanted to see, okay? And, they were really anti it. There's a very famous figure that, they put out a survey for doctors, which 45,000 doctors that took part in this survey. and 41,000 of them said they didn't actually want the NHS. Okay, so that's a really, really big figure there, guys. Okay, and it's really important that Bevan, he knows he's got to win these doctors round, because otherwise his dream of this free national health service will never come about. So Bevan promises them a really good salary, and he also says they will still have the option to treat private patients if they want to. Now, the impact of this obviously is massive. Okay, so the life expectancy of women went from 66 to 83 from 1948, and for men it went to 64 to 79. Okay, however, even to this day, life expectancy is always going to be impacted by, their living conditions and how they're living their lives. That hasn't changed. So it's really important even today that we are making sure we keep up with helping society, to live in the right conditions and sort of lead their life in a sort of healthy manner. So this brings me to the end of our little Loom lecture today. I know it's been quite short, but hopefully you've managed to get all the key information. Now, the source you've been set to look at and the exam question looking at this week is how useful is source A to historians studying the creation of the NHS? It asks you to explain your answer using the source A, which hopefully you can see here. It says right here, down here, and your own contextual knowledge. And that is worth 8 marks. So the very first thing, going back to that thing of bug, remember when you bug your answer, okay, is firstly you box. And in this case, I have circles, so I do apologise, but, just for the purpose of this. Okay, so you box your command word. So it's asking you how useful something is. So we already know you are going to need to balance your answer. So on one side, you need to say, actually, yeah, this source is very useful to an extent for X, Y, and Z reasons, okay? But it's asking you to also look at the other side. So actually, what are its limitations? What things can you not see from the source, which you know from your contextual knowledge, okay? So the next thing you need to look at is what is actually the questions asking you, which we know is to do with the creation of the NHS. So how did it come about? Okay, what was the importance of it? And finally, looking at the marks tells us how many paragraphs the sort of examiner would be looking for as a minimum. And being 8 marks, we are looking for at least 2 Peel paragraphs. Okay, remember that's following that point, evidence, explain, and link writing frame. Okay, right then. So hopefully you guys will have, be able to write source A in your page. You'll be able to start mind mapping some ideas of what you can see from this source. Now I'm going to go through some things I've seen. Okay, remember, it'd be handy if you pause this now though and write down your own things before you sort of match them up with mine. Okay, so things that I thought that why we could argue this source was actually very useful to a historian, who was understanding the creation of the NHS. So firstly, you can see quite clearly a line of men here looking very grumpy, okay, and a bit cross. And these are quite clearly meant to represent doctors who are unhappy about the idea of a free healthcare. They want their patients to pay. All right, and like I've told you in the survey given out to doctors, 45,000 doctors, 41,000 of them said they did not want the National Health Service. All right, so that's a really good bit of evidence for you. You can make sure you use the source when you're answering this question at all times, okay? But that's, really, you're able to really use information, okay, and relate it back to your context. Now, obviously, we know, very important, we can see the doctors are being fed this medicine, okay, and because that is trying to, hopefully, we're thinking, we know that it's very important to win them round. They need to be on board with the idea of the creation of the NHS, or it will never happen. Another really important bit why the source is very useful for us, okay, is this key figure over here. Now, this is obviously looking like a bit of a motherly figure, and it is meant to be Aneurin Bevan, okay. On his hat, you can see a B, okay, so that obviously stands for Aneurin Bevan, who we know is appointed the Minister of Health after the Second World War with the new Labour government. Okay, this is him winning round the doctors, saying to them, helping them with good salaries and the option to still treat patients privately. So they're not happy about it, but they are accepting it. And you can see that by the fact they are queuing up and they are also accepting what he's offering them. He's offering them in the pot. You can see the National Health Service round the edge, okay? So they are starting to accept that. Now, to make sure that you get top marks on this question, you need to make sure you are engaging with the provenance of the source. And remember, the provenance of the source is the tap, okay? So the time, when was it written, okay? Author, so who's it written by or created by, and the purpose of it. So what was the leading purpose? And you can see down the bottom it says source A is a cartoon from the satirical. Okay, satirical kind of means it's meant to be poking fun, a bit jokey, taking the mick a little bit. Okay, magazine Punch. It was released in 1948 and it shows the Minister for Health, Aneurin Bevan, giving the doctors their medicine. And the title of the cartoon, It Still Tastes Awful. Okay, so hopefully from that we can start to think about the time of it. Well, we know it's reliable, this source, because it's created at the time that the NHS was. It's in 1948, so that's a tick on how this is useful for historians. Well, okay, the author we know is from the Punch magazine. Okay, we know it's going to be a bit cartoony. It's got satire, so this might be a bit more of a limitation. It's holding it back a little bit. It's not giving us really detailed historical information. It's a bit of fun, but still obviously useful. Then finally, okay, the purpose. So we can see that hopefully this magazine cover is saying actually the doctors have been very outdated with their attitude, but Bevan knows best, okay? It's poking fun at the situations between Bevan and the doctors. It's laughing that the doctors are not happy with what they've been asked to do, but they are getting on with it, okay? It's this whole sort of like idea that mother knows best, and Bevan is meant to be that person who knows best, okay? So hopefully we're getting this from the source. It's really important you take time to analyse these sources in detail, okay? So obviously that's our first peel paragraph done. We should be able to pack loads into there. If you need to write in a bit more, that's fine, okay? But now we should also be thinking about what limitations. So what do we know from our own knowledge that perhaps the source isn't showing us? Well, firstly, obviously, we know that the ideas of the NHS came from the Beveridge Report, okay, 1942, and this is the whole idea of the five giants, and sort of the movement away from the movement into the government having this concept of the cradle to the grave, so making sure that people are nurtured and looked after from birth to death. Okay, so we can't see that in this source, but we know it's very important in the creation of the NHS, all right? Along with that, we also know that it was the Labour Party after the war that promised to follow this advice, okay? And Beveridge's report actually was a bestseller in England, okay, selling 100,000 copies in the first month alone. And, Labour winning the general election meant they followed this report, okay? And these were really key points in its creation. Okay, it's also very important when we talk about the creation, the impact it had in 1948. And at this point in time, around 8 million people had never even seen a doctor. Okay, so that's a massive amount of the country didn't have access to healthcare of any sort. All right, and that was, something that Bevan wanted to address. And obviously, we know sort of as moving forward, the life expectancy from the creation of the NHS, we've already said that women went from 66 to 83 and men went from 64 to 79. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to get a really good idea of, how you should answer this question, some context around it. All I would say is make sure you're constantly referring back to the source at all times. Okay, because that's really important for your evidence as part of Peel, is you need to be working with that source, okay? Everything needs to relate back to that the best you can. All right, well, I look forward to reading all of your answers, Year 9. Good luck. I'm sure they will be absolutely brilliant.